Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, welcome to this exciting 6-part series and journey on the science and spirituality of marriage. So, hopefully, you guys have gotten the memo thus far that it was highly, highly advisable that you come with your spouse. I'm just taking a glance around the room. I don't necessarily see that people have all come in pairs, unless maybe my husn dhan of you is that you are sitting in different places, mashallah. But if you are here with your spouse, it is recommended that you sit together, inshallah. The objective and the style of this particular program is supposed to be workshop style. The very first session today will have a light kind of activity, session 1 and session 2 is going to be a little bit more information heavy, but sessions 3 onwards, I would say it's about 50% activity based, 50% sort of informational. So if you forgot to bring your spouse today, or you were unable to convince them to come with you on this occasion, and that sometimes happens because I often, in my therapy with marital couples, sometimes get one member and they can't convince the other one to show up, right? So, and vice versa. So inshallah, at the very least or worst, let's say, if you're unable to convince your spouse to come, maybe you'll take at least the workbook and the activities, you'll go home and do them as homework, inshallah, with your spouse. So just a logistical note, we have given you the workbook, right? So did we charge anything for this? MashaAllah, you guys what a deal here, right? You got a free workbook out of it, inshallah. Please, I recommend don't share that widely. It's really more for internal uses, inshallah. But I would also recommend that you have the workbook available to you throughout the duration of the workshop. So if you want to bring like an iPad or, whatever tablet, on your phone, or you want to go ahead and just get it printed out, for example, and compile it and bring it with you, that would be really good, inshallah. And in fact, if you brought like a paper and pencil, or, as my son tells me, Dad, like nobody uses paper and pencil anymore, right? He says, you're so old school. Look at you with your notebook, right? he says, we have tablets nowadays and electronic pencils and whatnot. So feel free to bring the tools that you need. Okay, a few disclaimers, right? Because this is understandably some sensitivities with regard to getting couples to have some activities and some discussion and facilitating that within this environment. Again, as I mentioned, it's interactive. The second thing to note is that, again, with many, over a decade of experience in doing marital counseling and therapy, I know that when you bring couples in and you start to open up a particular conversation or discussion, sometimes you land and you cross certain minds and they sort of go off, right? And they can be triggering some resentments, some old issues, or unprocessed or unresolved tensions. So I suggest that, bear through that, right? If it becomes sort of, you come across an issue like that, let's first anticipate that that's a possibility and that's okay. Okay, and secondly, that I suggest you just choose to shelve that aspect of the dialogue. So let's say it's about your mother or mother-in-law comes up and you say, okay, we're talking about our family dynamics. Mother-in-law has come into the mix. Let's shelve that for a different day. We'll kind of come back to that, inshallah, because we don't want to, ignite a fire and create an iman amana crisis, right? within the setting. The other skill, I would say, and this is a generalized skill across the board that I would suggest you employ, is that you don't personalize statements that your spouse makes of you. So in the activities, we're gonna, sometimes we ask questions that you may not necessarily be ready to hear the answer for. So, take some pills of sabr, right? and be prepared to hear some of those responses, because some of these questions are designed to elicit questions that you may not necessarily always appreciate or like all the answers to, right? And so don't personalize it and say, like and become defensive and get upset over why would you say this. Appreciate the fact that this conversation is happening and that it's an expression of the, other person's experience in this relationship. And now at this point, if anybody would like to exit after all of these disclaimers, you've signed kind of on the dotted line implicitly, and we can kind of proceed, inshallah ta'ala. So again, today I'm going to be just talking about the introduction, right? Kind of introducing the concept today. Let's start with, even before we get into that, since we're already on the sort of little bit of that risk, kind of danger evoking trigger type of conversation, let's start with the qawl of Ali radiallahu anhu. Sayyidina Ali was asked, Mal haqiqatu nikah? He said, what is the reality of marriage? And he said, sururu shahrin, ghumumu dahrin, qusuru dhahrin, nuzulu qabrin. Okay, you might say, why start off on such a pessimistic note? And I'll explain. But Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, when he was asked, what is the reality of marriage? He says, it's a few moments of joy, a month or two, some honeymooning period, a long period of anxiety and stress, such that the anxiety leads to you becoming a hunchback and you entering the grave. That was his khulasa, right? A summary of marriage. Why take sort of a pessimistic approach? I'm saying this because sometimes we have to break the notion that marriage was supposed to be easy, right? That marriage is supposed to be a walk in the park. And sometimes, especially as Muslims, where we don't know the dynamics and the privacy that we maintain within our households, we don't know the dynamics in the other households as well. So we tend to assume that the grass is greener on the other side. But let me share this for you. Happy couples research overwhelmingly shows that people who are satisfied with their marriages are not individuals who do not have problems. Said differently, people who are happy have problems in their marriage. It's a common denominator. People who are not happy also have problems in their marriage. What's the difference between the two? The difference between the two is that those people who have problems in their marriage, they know how to effectively manage those problems such that it doesn't become the central or center of their marriage, and it doesn't take over the dynamics of their marriage. And I'll illustrate kind of what I mean by that, right? So the point that I'm trying to drive home is that all couples, all marriages are going to inevitably have some irreconcilable conflicts, right? Not that, so example, let me give you maybe a concrete example just to illustrate the point. Take couple number one, hypothetical, and these are all built off of my own real cases, by the way, that I've been working with over hundreds and hundreds of married couples that I've been working with. So take couple number one, and you'll see I'm making reference to extended family a lot because that's a part of the benefit and the supports that we have as a Muslim community and our cultures where we have a lot of family involvement and support. It's also a source of stress for us as well. So take couple number one, whom they say, okay, there's a mother-in-law problem, which, by the way, I'm going to show you the data. About 1/3, or one of the top reasons for divorce, at least in American Muslim communities, is in-law conflict, okay, disagreement over in-laws. Let's take an example. Mother-in-law conflict. Persons who's met, the husband says, this is my mother. Obviously, he's biased towards her, and he wants his wife to love his mother the way he does. And he wants his mother to love his wife the way he does. But the reality is that's not the case. right? And so there's often a great degree of tension, right, that naturally arises between such individuals. There's a sort of expectation. Oftentimes your mother, and this is more, by the way, I'm focusing on mother-in-law because this is 90% more of the problem than the other way around, okay? And the husband, it's not that it doesn't exist, but the mother-in-law on the side of the husband's mother tends to be a central figure that becomes problematic, okay? So mom has done what? Has been spending and invested her whole life to raise this boy and knows all of the peculiarities of what he needs and has this altruistic nature to take care of him. C's daughter-in-law doesn't have that same instinct, right? And so she becomes a little bit upset or irritated or concerned about the fact that she doesn't take care of my son and the household the way that I do. Natural, isn't it? Because obviously your mom is going to have that instinct of care and compassion, sort of. But your wife is not going to take care of you the way that your mother would, right? And that's also a false expectation for the males. So it tends to get into an issue. So the point of what I was saying is the management. Let's take the example of the management. So one scenario is that they keep fighting about this. They say, we have to go visit my mom. My mom has an expectation to visit. I don't want to visit your mom. I don't want to have anything to do with your mom. So what does a wife want? No relationship with mom. What does the husband want? Complete enmeshment with the family, right? So where do they find a middle ground? Every week or every other week or every Eid, right, or every celebration, this can be a conflict. That's the irreconcilable problem that is not well managed. It just keeps fuming. The fire keeps fuming every time. And every time it happens, it generates resentment in the individual towards the other person. They carry more and more memories and more negative feelings towards the other person. Example number 2, effectively managed. Again, irreconcilable conflict. Same scenario. I, as a wife, have certain issues with the way that your mother treats me, and comments and things that she's said or implied or passive aggressively. I don't want to see your mom ever again. That's the ideal dream. Husband, on the other hand, says, that's my mom. How can we cut off a relationship? I need you to come and we need to suck it up and have sabr and deal with it. How do they effectively manage it? The management solution is that the wife says, look, silatul rahim, I'm not going to break ties between. This is your mom. I'm going to push myself to my limits, and that is maybe I can visit her once a month or every other week. But I'm not going to prevent you and the children to go. And the husband says, khalas, okay, I accept the fact that this is the scenario and I have to manage it effectively, and I'm not going to come home and express my resentments or tell you to come or talk about how wonderful my mom is in front of you because it triggers you. Effectively managed. They have a routine in which every month or every other week, they go and they visit. Every other week, he goes on his own with the children. He upholds her sort of honor in front of his mom by not bringing up the issue. They don't really make it an issue inside their household. And for years, they go on like this. Is it ideal? Is it a solution? Is it a utopia? It's not. But it is effectively managed. It is effectively managed. So what we have to understand is that half of marriage, right, and marital satisfaction is about managing our expectations and being able to maintain positivity where negativity can dominate, despite irreconcilable solutions. So, okay. Coming back to this, now I kind of jumped ahead of myself a little bit. This whole workshop, we based upon this ayah, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That from the verses and from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are that He has created from amongst yourselves spouses so that you may dwell with them, and has made mawaddah, love and compassion. That love and compassion are intimately connected with one another, right? We have these stages of marriage. At the beginning stages of marriage, we have what we call, and the science shows us, passionate love, right? That's like the honeymooning stage when individuals are excited and it lasts for, a couple of months, and then the sihr, the magic, kind of wears off, right? And then you're left with the disagreements and tensions between the two that you have to manage. And guess what? If you manage those tensions effectively and you're able to conquer each of those issues, then you start to develop compassion and companionship with one another. Are there successful examples of this? Many. And we'll get into that, inshallah. And the other ayah, وَلِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ وَلِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. Right? They are a garment to you and you are a garment to them. That's the other ayah in which informs kind of the foundations of this. So we want to generate love. We want to generate compassion, real love, real love is that which you've gone through sacrifice and struggle, right? Not just spoken, but love is that which you have gone through some serious sacrifice and struggle with one another. And this notion of garments. What does garments do? Garments are things that, like your inner garment, it protects you, keeps you warm. It shelters you from your faults, right? It shelters you from other people seeing your flaws. Who sees your flaws? The inner side of your garment, right? Like nobody is behind the cloak, right? And we actually reserve quite literally, right? Quite literally, the only people or person that you unveil yourself in front of completely is your spouse. So that notion of garment, and that's a very vulnerable sort of space to allow yourself to kind of give yourself an entirety and your entire body to somebody else. And so there is something very intimate about that. And there's also a big amana and trust that is associated with that as well. And your spouse knows all of your secrets. Meaning that, my sheikh, he would say that how does he know if somebody is developing spiritually or not? Are they growing spiritually? One of his chief assessments would be that once an individual is going through these stages of spiritual development, he would say, now let me speak to your spouse, your wife, or vice versa. And he says, if your spouse says that you are a wali of Allah, you are a spiritual muttaqi person, then you are a muttaqi person. It's very difficult to convince your spouse. Why? Because, you can be nice and put together for short periods of time with guests, with people outside, but you are inside of your household. And so there are moments when you're irritated. There are moments when you get triggered. There are moments when you're not looking your best, when you're not acting your best. Who sees all of that? Who sees all of that? Your spouse sees all of that. And that's why, there's a hikmah in the fact that the Prophet ﷺ says, what diyafa is 3 days, right? After 3 days, you're not supposed to stay in a person's house anymore as a guest. What happens after 3 days? You can manage for 3 days to host the guests, feed them, sit with them, converse with them, set up your house for them. But after 3 days, it becomes very challenging. You got to go back to normal life, right? You go back to work, you got to go back to your own routines, you got to go back. So you start to irritate one another or start to feel like a burden on one another. So the deen is preventing us from being a burden upon, individuals who are not our family members. But imagine that you're with such an individual for an extended period of time. So this is why actually we see one of the, I believe, the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ that we have, that we may not necessarily pay attention to, is the fact that when you asked all of his spouses about the Prophet ﷺ, in which we get the details of the way that he conducted himself inside of the household, then you understand this must be a Nabi. Nobody can be that good inside the household, right? No man, no spouse, nobody can be that good and put together inside of the household. And that the spouse narrates with great admiration for such an individual, right? That is written in the books for, I mean, if my wife had to write the details of our whole entire household and marriage and everything I do, I don't know if I'd want that to be published. Frankly speaking, I'd say, let's do some editing here, right? Before we kind of compile our memoirs of our relationship within the household, right? But this is like the camera on the Prophet ﷺ, right? At all times, whether it's a spouse, whether it's the other Sahaba, whether it's the children, whether it's the elders, everybody's watching the Prophet ﷺ, and they are saying this man is not like any other man, right? So, yeah. Just want to make sure I have mine. Okay. So what are we going to do? We're going to develop some knowledge and skills in this workshop. Again, the design is to be hands-on. And we understand that the purpose of marriage is global and has been universal, and people have been getting married for forever. So this is a very natural need. Marriage fulfills very important sort of elements of human existence. One is obviously need for emotional closeness, sense of companionship, physical intimacy, having children, right? تزوجوا الودود الولود, right? The Prophet ﷺ says, marry those who are loving and also fertile, giving us indication what? That part of the essential elements of marriage is to have children, not, إن يشاء Allah, meaning if Allah Ta'ala, بإذن الله تعالى, if Allah Ta'ala wills, of course that's in the hands of Allah Ta'ala, whom He wills to have children, whom He does not. And to bring families together. You'll see this a lot, right, within our traditions, right? That you see this in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, across generations, in which people would sometimes marry strategically in order to unify greater families together. It's the joining of families, rather than the kind of Western concept that like two individuals independent of their families, they sort of like go off and they elope, so to speak. I don't know why it's always in Vegas. They tend to go to like Vegas and elope, and then Sin City, right? And then they come back and tell everybody that, we were drunk and we got married, and I don't know if is that even valid, right? Right? You're you're sort of independent from one another. Rather, like marriage in Islam has an essential component of joining families, ties together. The idea is that you're building a unit in which you will have children, and then you will join. It takes a village to connect everybody together, and everybody's interconnected with one another, like it or not, with boundaries. With boundaries. The difference between enmeshment and closeness. Enmeshment and closeness. This is one of the some of the problems that sometimes Muslim marriages also have, is a little bit too much enmeshment. Married people are also happier and healthier. They do better financially. They tend to live longer, right? Of course, we're talking about happy marriages, right? Because some people may be like, I have all sorts of health conditions as a result of my marriage. Okay, so what are the sources of this particular workshop? So what we've done is our own research, okay? And that is, we've done qualitative, in-depth interviews with 70 married couples, happily married couples. Why? The focus being on the happily married couples, because of the fact that what we wanted to do is to shift it from a problem-focused sort of arrangement and issue-focused to rather success-oriented. So we want to explore what are the characteristics, what are the essential features and traits that we find are common denominators that happy married couples seem to report. That's kind of what we want to do. And then we can say proactively and preventatively, and even a certain degree interventionally, can we realign ourselves towards a positive rather than the absence thereof? Instead of saying don't fight, So what do you do instead? So I have a couple, right, one time in my earlier days of doing marital therapy. So I said, okay, I'm going to do some communication skill building. So I taught them not to fight, right? And then they came back and they said, this is very useful, but, our dinners, our household is relatively pretty quiet now, right? We just don't speak to each other very much, right? So, okay, you're not fighting, but are you necessarily feeling close and connected with each other, right? That's another issue. So, rather than the opposite of saying what we don't do, we also want to think about the things that we do that is going to be kind of preventative and correctional. So the criterion was 10 years, because if you take 70 happily married people, after 3 months, mashallah, they're all like, super happy, right? but those that have withstood, as they say in the 5-year itch in at least the United States, everyone has there's a 1-year itch and then there's a 5-year itch. So you have like 2 milestones. If you make it past 1 year, basically after the honeymooning period, then you're okay. And then there's a 5-year itch, and then like you want to get divorced after 5 years, but then if you can make it past the 5 years, you have some more resilience, right? And then we have these interesting empty nesting type of phenomenon of divorces happening as well. This is another issue. The other thing that informs our background and work here is our clinical experiences. So our clinical experiences, all of the anecdotal experiences at Khalil Center with our team, all of us as a collection of the hundreds, if not thousands of marital cases that we've been working with, okay? Just to give you sort of perspective, been working with I would say spectrum of relatively practicing religious Muslim families for, over 15 years. So meaning that some people may be culturally religious, some people may be very religious, and you have the whole spectrum in between. But we've been working with individuals who value Islam on some level in their lives, right? That's sort of the population that we've been working with I would say, relatively middle-class kinds of communities, okay? And then the other is looking at the literature, looking at the scientific literature and what does the psychological literature say, and then, of course, the Islamic literature as well. And so why focus on happily married couples? Well, we tend to highlight media attention, and tends to really grab all the bad stuff that are happening, but we tend to not focus so much on the good stuff that is happening. And so we tend to ignore and not appreciate and look at the happily married experiences. Of course, if we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that is a chief example of a wonderful sort of mine of literature and understanding of interactions between the Prophet ﷺ and his wives, to demonstrate to us some of the characteristics that we may be able to sort of work on and build. Take, for example, the fondness that, in particular, the Prophet ﷺ had of Khadija radiallahu anha, right? The one who was there, in fact, to such an extent that he felt the pain of the loss of his spouse, to such an extent that it created the amil huzn, a major barrier, a major sort of factor leading to the year of grief and sadness to the Prophet ﷺ, was this incredible woman that is across sort of human history, is a example to be emulated, right? In which Aisha radiallahu anha used to become jealous whenever Khadija radiallahu anha's name came up. In fact, all of the children, with the exception of one of the Prophet ﷺ's children, he had with Khadija radiallahu anha. And he says, he would say whenever her name came up, and Aisha radiallahu anha would get upset, and she would say, like, what is it with you and this woman? Like, what is it? I'm paraphrasing, obviously, right? What is it? Like, what's so special? He would say, his eyes would well up with tears, and he would say, kanat wa kanat. She was really something. She was something else. That sort of admiration and connection and love. In fact, the ulama tell us that the Prophet ﷺ, from obviously after the death of Khadija radiallahu anha, he had multiple marriages, right? Multiple wives at the same time. But during the time that he was married to Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the only wife. So obviously there are many wujuh reasons for this. Some of the reasons obviously afterwards, after Nubuwwah and after the Hijrah and whatnot, there's tribal alliances and strategic marriages and diversity across ethnic and religious groups and tribal groups that so that there's no favoritism to say that the Prophet ﷺ is somehow like ethnocentric around one particular group of individuals. So strategically. But also, one of the things that they say is that during the time of the time when he was with Khadija radiallahu anha, that relationship was such a special relationship that it fulfilled every single layer that an individual could potentially have, that didn't even necessitate or even create the imagination for beyond having a relationship beyond that union. So it just sort of highlights the incredibleness of that particular marriage, to say that if the marriage is like that good, then we talk about, at least in this part of the world, polygamy, right? I mean, it's not like taboo. I'd get shot in the United States, quite literally, right? Because we all carry weapons, and even the liberals now, they do as well, as as you may have noticed in the media. So it's kind of strange, compassionate, deathly killer, intolerant liberals, right? Want you to force you to be tolerant. Okay. So the deep, strong quality and fulfilling relationship with the people around us, especially the relationship with our partners, keeps us happy. Here's a very strange kind of study in which individuals are undergoing shocks. Okay, and they're holding the hand of their spouse, and those that are holding the hands of the spouse, their degree of relaxation or stress, right? Stress is considerably lower than those that are not. And again, you may say, I would prefer my spouse be outside of the room because he stresses me out just being there. Right? And I kid you not, I work with a lot of couples, and a lot of assessment is in the nonverbals, even in the initial sessions when they come in. Some couples will come in and you can get a sense of like, how much work do I got to do with this, right? With this particular relationship. Some couples, usually on the younger side, tend to come in with mixed stuff. They get like really upset and riled up about issues, but they can also cool down and be very crazy, still like very positive towards each other. Then you have some of these old folks that have like resented each other for decades, okay? They come in the room and they sit next to each other and it's just tension in the room. They haven't said a single word to one another, and it's like they could like, they don't even want each other to be in the room almost, right? And I'm like, I don't know if I want to open this up, because as soon as we open this up, it seems like it's going to get quite heated, right? So we may need to work a little separately for now until we can get you guys in the room to even tolerate one another's presence with one another. Happy marriages tend to have longer lifespans, right? However, on the other side, divorce rates are extremely high, right? Particularly in Western and developed countries. I did a little bit of kind of search on the GCC, and it seems like Qatar is on the higher end of the GCC countries in terms of divorce rates. It's hard to predict because it doesn't seem like there's like really definitive studies on divorce rates, perhaps because could be taboo discussion to have, but some of this documentation comes from the registration with the ministries of how many marriages are registered against how many divorces are kind of like registered. And so, this demonstrates to us that we need to do some work. Similarly, actually, it seems to be almost similarly the case that Muslims, whether in the United States, GCC, we tend to see numbers around 30-ish%, 25 to 30%. So alhamdulillah, we're not like up there like, say, the Western countries of upwards of 40, 50% type of thing, sometimes 60. but rather Muslims seem to be somewhere between 25 and 30. At the same time, just staying together doesn't mean that you are happy, right? Because, although many marriages may stay together, they may be staying together because they feel compelled to stay with one another, whereas in maybe more liberal societies, they don't feel that sort of like compulsion to sort of stay together. And so one follow-up study went to a well-to-do middle-class kind of California-based study with Muslims, American Muslims in that area, and they found that 56% of them reported at least one moderate to major issue, with 68% of couples reporting significantly negative interaction. So these are the people who are together. Okay, so they're together. Okay, some of the most common issues that we see, again, this is based upon my sample of American Muslims. Take it with a grain of salt, right? I don't have data on the other communities. We study our communities. If the government's going to surveillance us, then we may as well learn something about our own communities as well, right? Do some data analyses. In-laws seems to be one of the primary chief causes. Intimacy, finances, family and friends, meaning prioritizing that over their relationship, and differing interests, people just not getting along with one another. Okay, so consequences of unhappy marriages, suicide rates, right? Some people are like, well, this is so bad. Do I really want to live like this for the rest of my life? Immune systems compromised, right? Physical health issues, depression, anxiety, higher risk for addiction, feelings of loneliness, insecurity, infidelity, obviously, financial status being impacted, and obviously the overall household environment, children obviously being very adversely affected. But there's hope. There's hope. And that's why we're doing this workshop, right? I don't want to make it too bleak. And there is effective, taking a class and a workshop on marriage seems to have a significantly positive effect on your marital satisfaction. Okay, so knowledge is power. Okay, and then obviously, ilm and amal. So then that's why we're doing the workshops and activities, so that you can practice this. There's guidebooks on spousal relationships, there's marriage strengthening programs, there are marital therapies. So I would encourage, again, the disclaimer is, as you're doing this, if you're finding that we're coming across certain issues that seems like it requires a little bit more support, right, professional support, I would say, early intervention is better than later intervention. And I mean that, looking at hundreds and hundreds of cases, as I was kind of joking about the couple who comes in with a lot of resentment in my mind is the number one killer of marital satisfaction. What ends up happening is that there are two types of problems. There are problems that you don't need to discuss. What I mean by that is you come home stressed, you're tired from work, you're a little irritable, you say some things that you don't mean, your spouse kind of snaps back a little bit, and you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning, and you move on with your life. You can make that a problem by making it a problem and holding resentment and saying, we need to process the heck out of this. Why would you do that? You said this, or how come you were irritable yesterday? That you're making a problem out of nothing there. What I'm saying is that's a problem that doesn't need to be discussed. That's a problem that doesn't need to be discussed. It's just human experience. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to be irritable from time to time. You're going to be stressed. Don't take it personal, or as my daughter says, it's not that deep, Dad, right? Don't stop crashing out. It's not that deep, right? As she says, right? So it's not that deep. Don't make it too deep, okay? And then there's another problem, which is indication of a long-standing, deeper-rooted problem that keeps emerging. It's not like I'm just tired from work, I just didn't eat, or I didn't get any sleep today, and so I'm a little irritable, and so I said some things, you said some things, and we move on. But it keeps coming up. Finances, intimacy, child rearing, values, and you just avoid the problem, and every time it comes up, it creates a crisis. Your lack of resolution of those problems generates resentment. The longer that problem lasts, and the more incidents, it's almost like math, okay? It's statistical. You can take the number of incidents. In fact, one of our students at the PhD students at Ibn Khaldun University saw that the longer held grudges, right, and more frequent grudges held is a linear sort of predictor of marital satisfaction and lack thereof. Okay, so the more resentment that ends up building as a result of unresolved conflict that keeps emerging over and over again, and you have more and more resentment building, it starts to erode. It starts to like diminish kind of the integrity of the marriage, and then it starts to take away from positive feelings. That's where you get to, you're like 50 years old after a 30-year marriage sitting next to each other. You don't need to say anything. Why? Because you have all this pent up sort of resentment that's just been stored, right, all inside. And so early intervention becomes very critical. Okay, now turning to the hope. Happy characteristics of happy couples. These are the 7. Okay, so these are the 7 characteristics that we've identified in our research that seem to be associated with the positive characteristics needed to be able to have a happy marriage. Okay, and these 7 are the topics and modules that we're going to be covering over the course of the next six weeks. I'm going to get into module 1 today. It's a little bit briefer, and then we're going to dive in from 2 to 7 over the course of the next 6 parts of this program, inshallah. Quality number 1, having a positive outlook towards each other and towards the marriage and each other. In other words, this is like husn al-dhan of your spouse. Okay, so I'll share, kind of an Islamic anecdote, right? The Prophet ﷺ says that if somebody says to you, you're going to apply this to your marriage, okay, to your spouse. If somebody says to you that, or claims that a mountain has moved from its place, believe it. If somebody says to you that they have changed their character, don't believe it. Very interesting, right? You would assume that the second is more probable than the first, right? Well, the scholars have given a lot of explanation on this. One of the concluding explanations and summary of this is the following. It's not that character is impossible to change, it's difficult. And the key here is, for us, when you are observing somebody else, assume that they will behave the same way that they've always been behaving. Meaning, don't make it a project to change your spouse. Like, many of my couples come in and they say, do something with this guy, okay? Can you like knock some sense into him, or, change him? Or I say, this isn't like a, spousal production factory, right? Like, what you want me to like cut his hair too, and like, and take him to the gym or something like that as well. Like, no, this isn't like a spousal reformation program. This is a marital sort of program. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, "Hassinu akhlaqakum." So who is this directed to? Who's the mukhatab here? You, us. You change your character. You develop your character. Doesn't say, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't say you won't be able to change your character. Doesn't say you will be hopeless in the face of changing your character. You will always be the same. No, the Prophet ﷺ says don't be the same. A Muslim's yesterday is not the same as today or tomorrow, right? So you must change your behavior. But when it comes to your attitude towards others, then you assume that they will remain the same. So what does that mean? It means you learn to manage your reactions to that individual. So the Quran says, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ فَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. This is in the context of a marriage. In the context of marriage. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Deal with them. Be in a relationship with your spouses in goodness, in good conduct. فَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. if you dislike something in them. Perhaps you dislike something, but in it is immense khair for you. This is for somebody who's married. Okay, before you get married, don't have husn dhan. It's not a premarital advice. Before you get married, interrogate, right? Interrogate. The person's like, are you, what are your values? What are your goals? What are your characteristics? How do you treat your parents? How do you treat your siblings? All of that. Okay, so before you get married, su'u dhan. Inna min al-hadri su'u dhan. This is true. When you're going to take a business partner, for example, you're going to invest all this money together. You have to make sure you're going to hire an employee. You're going to go into a business with somebody. Make sure this person, you have vetted them thoroughly. You are going to get married to this person. They're going to be the mother of your children, the father of your children. Vet them carefully before. That's pre-marriage. Don't carry that attitude after, though. When you carry after marriage, it's all husn dhan. It's all حسن ظن. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم. O you who believe, abstain from certain types of thinking, for indeed they are evil, right? They may be sinful. So this is not necessarily easy. Okay, this requires depersonalization. Happy couples repeatedly seem to demonstrate and show a dominance of positive perspectives towards their spouses over and above negative views about their spouse. That's the bottom line. It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. You create your reality. It's just tasawwurat. Okay, look. Husn dhan is not about reality. I had a couple one time. Husband says to me, wife is doing this, this, and this, and this. I said, okay. Why don't we reframe this? Why do you think she's doing this? Oh, because she's selfish. She wants to get back at me. She doesn't understand me. She doesn't respect me. Okay. So let's frame this. Is there any other possibility of why she might be doing this to you? How about we take the perspective, she cares so much about the relationship that she verbalizes and vocalizes all of her concerns in order to correct them because she's invested in the relationship. What do you think about that? I don't know about that. Which means what? That she probably loves you and wants to ensure that this marriage is going right. Because if she didn't care, or he didn't care, they just would be withdrawn. They'd say, I don't care. I'm just not going to talk to you, right? And then he's like, it feels like I'm kind of psychologically tricking myself. He says, but that's what husn dhan is. Husn dhan is it's not easy. Husn dhan is about looking at what's possible, not what's probable. Okay, very important. It's looking at what's possible and giving tarjih and preference to what's possible over what's probable. Okay, in the interest of the positive. Does that make sense? So we do this with individuals in context. That's in relationships. Husn dhan. So why is she doing this? Why is he doing this? Probably stressed out from work. Probably has something to do with some other issue that's going on. Maybe we need to, if I'm not saying ignore all the problems. If you feel like this is a repeated problem, you might need to have a communication about it. But the positivity is not eroded by the su'u dhan that starts to destroy and eat away at the marriage. Right? The Prophet ﷺ says, right? If an affliction happens to you, don't say وَلَوْ كُنْتُ فَعَلْتُ كَذَا وَكَذَا وَلَكِنْ قُلْ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ فَعَلْ قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلْ. Right? Don't regret. Regret is one of those things. Man, I shouldn't have married this person. Man, I should have thought carefully. Oh, what kind of life could I have had, hypothetically, had I married somebody else? What kind of life could I have had I done something differently in life? Right? This is, what does the Prophet ﷺ say? This opens up the bab of shaitan, the door for the shaitan, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed this in your qadar, that this is going to happen. So you're already on the ship and you're sailing. Why are you talking about whether you should have sailed in the first place or not, right? You're already on the ship. You have to deal with it, right? It's kind of a lost cause. But what does it do? It generates resentment when you start to think about all of the possible things. And I'll show you in next week sort of a logical sequence that demonstrates that this is actually quite faulty logic. Here are some self-reports from our qualitative studies. A woman married for 24 years says, my husband is a good, hardworking, upright, and compassionate person. A wife married for 19 years says, we are a good match, and I feel peaceful with him around. He values me and expresses his love often. A man married for 16 years says, our marriage continues to become more stable over time. Another unhealthy marriage mindset. I don't fully trust him. It feels like he doesn't want the best for me. Either of us can leave at any time. I keep finding myself wondering what it would be like if I had married someone else, especially after we fight. These questions eat away at me. My spouse doesn't care about me. He's constantly correcting me and always trying to change me. Okay? Exercise. Do we have time for the exercise? Yes, we can do the exercise for about 5 minutes. From this list, I want you to choose 3 to 5 of your spouse's positive personality traits. Then choose a specific time when your spouse exhibited this trait and why you appreciate it. Inform your spouse of this, if they're here. If they're here, you'll take turns each. You'll pick 3 to 5 of these characteristics. Then pick one of them and explain to them a specific time in which they exhibited this trait and why you appreciated it. Okay, and that is in the interest of tahdith bin ni'ma, or whoever, man lam yashkur an-nas lam yashkur Allah, being grateful, appreciation. The Prophet ﷺ also says what a person, right, 5 languages of love, when a man loves his brother, and this doesn't have to be men with men, of course, it can be with your spouses as well, then they shall let them know they love them. Okay? So it's in the interest of, we tend to, especially men are bad at this. Okay? Men are bad at expressing why they appreciate their wives. Because they just say, I just, they're just silent about it, right? So they don't necessarily verbalize, right, why they care about their spouses. And it often generates a lot of confusion as to whether this person is actually interested in me or just wants me around to take care of the children or not, right? So, okay, let's go ahead and take 5 to 7 minutes, inshallah, to do this exercise. Okay, so I'm gonna bring us back because we have to wrap up in 5 minutes so that we can go for salah. So if you didn't get to some of this or you're in the middle, I would say do it for homework, okay? And I'm serious about that because the workbook is yours. That's the reason why we've given you your workbook. The workbook has all these activities. I suggest that before we go to each next module, once we cover one, go home, and if we leave anything undone, work on it. Okay? You'll get the most and maximal benefit out of this. Yes? It was sent. It was sent in the email. Yeah, if you registered, then you should have received it. So maybe just email the organizers or talk to one of us up afterwards if you didn't get it. So the workbook here is essential. I would definitely say you have to make sure you get your hands on the workbook, inshallah. So to the point of the brother, actually it has to do with this idea, expressing gratitude and the languages of love. So first of all, this notion, I want to go to your point that we were just speaking about last, and that is, what if, what was the point we were saying? The last thing you mentioned?
About it is not genuine, it is a fake because it's a task that you are...
Right, but then we said something, that you should know if you, yeah. So this issue of knowing. Okay, so if you really cared about me, you would know what to say to me and do. Okay, first of all, this is problematic as a concept. Second of all, And I'm going to explain why. It is in the virtue literature, the concept of tawaddud. Tawaddud is a virtue among other virtues, like sabr, like hilm, like gratitude, like haya, and all these other things. Shaja'a, najda, iffa, etc. What is tawaddud? Tawaddud is the ability to express and show affection to people. Okay, that's one. Show affection to people. As the Prophet ﷺ says, if you love your brother, tell them. As somebody came to the Prophet ﷺ while he was holding and kissing his grandchildren, and he says, I have 5 grandchildren, or children rather, and I've never held them or kissed them ever. He says, well, like, the mercy, what do you want me to do? The mercy is not in your heart. Allah Ta'ala has taken the mercy out of your heart, right? So it's not a good thing. So tawaddud, showing love, that's one thing. Second, so then the question is going to be how. I'm going to come to that. That's the first part of it. The second is, related to the how, is communicating, seeking affection is actually the other side of the virtue. So initially when I was reading the Islamic virtue kind of literature and manuals, I assumed showing affection makes a lot of sense to me, right? It's easy to understand. You give sadaqah, selfless, give to people. But asking for affection here, interestingly enough, is a virtue. Like, not asking for wealth or people to serve you, that's not good. But asking for affection is actually a virtue. Meaning eliciting and asking and receiving affection is actually a good thing. Then I contemplated on this. Subhanallah, I said, in marriage, one of the biggest problems is that people will say, you should know what I need. You should know how to show me love. But this becomes problematic because not everybody speaks your love language. They don't know what you need. Okay? So, and genuinely. So you may like physical contact at certain times. Other times you may not want physical affection. Sometimes you want space. Other times you don't want space. Sometimes you want the person just to sit next to you. That's all. Right? And verbalizing, can you sit next to me and work on your computer and laptop? Just sit next to me. That's all I want. Right? Being able to communicate. So I said to one of my couples who had this issue, I said, look, when somebody, and then you say, well, I show affection this way. My affection and my love language is through service. Or as many men say, I go to work and I pay the bills. That's my affection. Like, what more do you want from me? Right? And so would you do that with a guest? A guest comes over and you're going to serve them food, right? Are you going to say, this is the way I make my food and this is the menu I like to cook and you must eat it? Is that what we do? No. We adjust, and I'm offended that you would not like this. No, what we do is we consider, right, what is it that the person likes, not what I like. Why? Because I'm trying to meet a need of affection of yours. If that's the case, I need to know how you like affection, not the way I like it. Because I'll tell you, I like this. But you may not like what I like. Right? And therefore, what do we tend to do? We tend to do naturally what we think that we would like to others. And when they don't appreciate it, we feel offended and upset. And they feel like their need is unmet. Because they say, why won't you show me physical affection? Well, because I grew up in a family where I observed not much physical affection, but a lot of people gave and served each other. That was their language. That's the way I show love. That's the way I like to receive love. Okay, then, but you must change the way that you are serving the other person then. Giving affection. You have to learn the love language of the other individual. Not expect that they're going to know how to do it for you, but rather that you would verbalize. You say, it's a combination. I ask of this from you so you know what I like, and then you do it. So you may say, is it ingenuine, disingenuous? No. If the person is willing to do it, that means they care, right? Like they're doing something that they're not accustomed to doing. You're asking them to do something they don't instinctively do. So the willingness to change something automated and do something intentionally is an indication of the fact that they care enough that they're willing to do that. Otherwise they would say, tough luck. This is the way I am. Deal with it. I'm not a physical person. I'm not an affection person. I don't like to speak. I'm not a verbal person. That's what they would say. But if they care, they would say, I know you like to have conversations, right? I'm not a very verbal person, but I'm more than happy to sit and to try to listen to you and have this conversation. So it's learning the language, right? We have these languages. Some people like gifts, tahadu, tahabu, right? Give gifts and love will form. Some people's love language is acts of service, right? Doing for others. Like the Prophet ﷺ used, when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, what did the Prophet ﷺ do? مَا كَانَ يَصْنَعُ النَّبِيُّ صلى الله عليه وسلم في بيتي. So كَانَ في خدمة أهلي. She says, actually before that, he is like the other men like all of the other men. What do you mean? Meaning, that additional sentence actually gives us an indication that it's not Arab culture. It's something that came later. That additional sentence tells us that the culture of that time, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, before she says, كَانَ فِي خِدْمَةِ أَهْلِهِ, that he used to be serving his family, means, before she's saying that, she said, he would do what all the other men do. I.e., the norm in this society is that the men serve their families. So what do you mean? He did what everyone else did. He came home and was in the service of his family. Okay? So service, it just kind of breaks this notion. Sometimes we think that, traditional like Muslim patriarchal kind of like families had this notion or way of sort of doing things in the household that has always been that way. But there's barriers, right? But when the time of Salah came, he was like, he didn't know anybody. Everybody was a stranger to him. He was up and ready to go for Salah. That was the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Immediately focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Quality time. The Prophet ﷺ used to receive people warmly. He would face them when he's communicating with them. He would not withdraw his hand until they withdrew their hand. Okay? He would accompany and walk with them to exit, right? So if your spouse is coming home from work and just like chilling on the couch and like, okay, who cares? They're here. Or they're gonna go get their food and do their thing, and no, let's do this together, right? Let me sit with you, right? And these are just little meaningful kind of like gestures that may come up. But as I said, everybody's language is different. Some people may need that time, whereas other people will say, I appreciate more service than I do quality time, for example. Everyone's love language is different. Physical touch, right? And the interesting thing is, obviously we see this in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that he had all of them covered, right? So the Prophet Aisha radiallahu anha used to say that during i'tikaf, he would bend his head out because obviously the house of the Prophet ﷺ was connected to the masjid. So in i'tikaf, he would put his head into the house of Aisha radiallahu anha and she would comb his hair. So just minimal displays of affection, right? Physical touch, right? That is that's there. Okay, so these are just the kind of summary, just some additional recommendations, thinking positively, looking at the positive characteristics of your spouse, remembering kind of the positive memories. These are things that I'm just suggesting, and it's now probably iqamah time, so we want to stop here, inshallah. The point about questions, we're not necessarily taking questions today because of the fact that these answers may actually be answered over the sequence of the next 6 parts, because we're going to go in depth. Today is very introductory. Next week, we're going to dive in more, inshallah, into another characteristic. And then we're going to have a lot more activities next week, and then eventually more and more and more activities, inshallah. So we're going to get a lot of opportunity to sort of interact with one another over the course of these 6 parts, inshallah ta'ala. And if something doesn't get answered at that point, then just bring it up, inshallah. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. All right, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.